Welcome to the Nonprofits. Our final story this week brings us to the intersection of the sacred and the delicious. Jason Friedman, tell us about these pious treats. You get that? Pious treats? All right.
That was a good one. Thank you. Thanks for the setup. All right. So although Poland embraces the nickname of Potato Land, there's another gastronomic delight hidden in the picturesque city of Pnan that the locals are perhaps even more protective of. The St. Martin's croissant became an EU-protected food in 2008, just over 100 years after it came into existence. The pastry is named after the saint who pivoted from Roman soldier to holy man after encountering a beggar on the road and feeling called to slice his own cloak in half to share with him. Centuries later, the sweet treat bearing his name was created in 1891 when a local baker left St. Martin's Church after a sermon about charity and felt similarly called upon to concoct a food that could be shared with the poor. The story is from RTE by Charlotte Ryan on June 11th, 2024.
All right, Jason, I'm sure, like me, reading this story just made you really hungry, and even I'm going to get even hungrier now that we're talking about it again. But so, do you think that Saint Martin deserved to have this? I mean, it seems like a high honor to have something so awesomely delicious named after you. Do you think that was deserved?
I mean, I think this is as silly as I think it is. I mean, I'll take this version of Christianity over the mega church, faith healing, kind of manic fever dream that is like modern American Christianity. You know, there's like a little bit of a beauty to this, to give half of what you own to someone you don't even know solely based on the fact that they are human and in need. That's pretty cool. Now, where I have difficulty is attributing that goodness to a God and not to the person, to the person who behaves in such a kind and self-sacrificing manner. I don't know. What's most difficult for me is when people are celebrated for doing what, like, I guess a God, told them to do. They did not come to this decision on their own. Apparently they were advised, told, coerced, by an outside agent. It doesn't matter really if it's moral or not, because it really wasn't under their own volition for the most part, or they didn't come up with it. To me, true morality cannot be based on like a precept. It should be coming from one's own convictions. That are formed through experience, be a success or failure. I don't know. So silly as the story really is, I think it's interesting how important the story is to the people, and that, the whole idea of giving oneself is actually being celebrated. I find that pretty wholesome. It's better than a lot of shit over here stateside.
Right. So you think that maybe this is a good thing in general. It's promoting selflessness. It's promoting helping each other, even though it's kind of tainted by this shroud of the sacred and the divine here. But I think at the bottom, I think we can all agree that it's just about a person, right? It's about this Saint Martin person. Helen, what's your take on Saint Martin there? Do you think sainthood is a good thing? Do you think that's worthy?
Well, as a former Catholic, no. I don't think sainthood is a good thing.
All right, we're getting the straight dope here tonight.
I'm just letting you all know it's not a good thing. And Martyrs, as just Jason pointed out, was a man of piety and giving, of being, giving to people that are less fortunate, and I'm all for that. And I also like to remind people that a lot of religious values, and this is kind of what the story reminded me of, is that these are humanistic values. We tend to do these things as atheists and humanists because we recognize the human in somebody else and we want to be helpful. Christians and people of belief are doing the exact same thing, but they use, God or Jesus as their motivation. But regardless of the motivation, it's still a humanistic act. Mm-hmm. And so this is what this is what the story kind of, reminded me of that, and it just comes down to choice of, what motivates our choices. So, that's the philosopher talking in me. But I do want to point out that sainthood in the Catholic Church is problematic a lot.
Do tell, Helen.
I will tell you some shit. So, for an example, now in recent memory, when Mother Teresa passed away, she was eligible for sainthood. Now, if you know the history of Mother Teresa, not the best human being, that she thought poverty and suffering was an honorable act, that it would bring people closer to God. But the church has spun that story to make the show like what a benevolent and kind person she was. So, and if you look back at many saints and their histories, there is some questionable to criminal things saints have done. So I've always had a problem with deifying people. People are people. There are people that I look up to and admire, and I think that's admirable to do. But when we start putting them on pedestals, we give them special magic powers. They, make up lies that they were blessed by God, especially back in the day when we didn't have science to explain these so-called miracles that happen. The church has not changed their rhetoric on that. And that's telling, because then it would be suddenly like the emperor's wearing no clothes. It would be like, okay, well, now we can see it for what it is, and that's why sainthood is very, very problematic. But the story is a very wholesome, I dig it from the humanist in me, digs this story, it's like that. And it's like wholesome, I'm like, cool, pastries and kindness. I'm a fan.
Hey. Two great tastes that taste great together, huh?
Yes.
Aaron, let's jump over to you. What was your takeaway here? Are these croissants, are they a labor of love, or is this just a sales gimmick to try to sell pastries to Catholics?
I think they're a labor of love. I think for the most part, from the article I read, the news story I watched, people they really appreciate that they were pretty proud that they were the ones to create this particular pastry. They're pretty proud that it's from their town, and they're pretty proud that it was created to help feed the poor and the hungry. I didn't actually hear much religious talk in the news story and the things that I read. It was mostly focused on the good that the pastry does, and that it's a reminder that we should help the poor and feed people that are hungry. And as everybody has said, I can get behind that. That's great. It's kind of a myth that non-religious people can't do good, that only you have to be religious to do good things. And that's just not true.
Right.
Non-religious people can do good things all the time. And if you actually go out and inquire of people why they do good things, I don't think the majority of people do it because are going to answer because God told me to do it. I think most people are going to answer because it makes them feel good, and it feels good to help other people that need our help.
So do you think they're doing a disservice here then by tying the saint's name to this croissant? I mean, would it be better if it was just the friendship croissant or something like that? Or do you think, does it add a little bit of cachet to the name, or does it make it special, or what, is there a downside to calling it Saint Martin's croissant? I
don't really think so. It's still part of the history of the location. It's still part of the history of that town. And there are probably problematic things with saints and things like that. But the fact that it came out of this town, I attribute it more to the name is more historical to me than it does to have a religious connotation. Now, if St. Martin turned out to be super problematic, I don't know the St. Martin's history or what, then yeah, I'd probably encourage us to change the name. But if St. Martin was actually maybe a decent human being and did some good works, then I don't really have a problem with it.
I want to point out that we have Napoleons. Just going to say.
Yeah, we do have Napoleons, yeah. And the Genghis Khan cheeseburger too, right? Or is that maybe I heard that somewhere else?
And not to mention all the problematic sport teams' names here in the United States.
Oh, of course,
the Redskins.
Exactly. Okay, so one thing that nobody mentioned, and that is it's right there in the headline, is that they call it the EU protected croissant, and so the story calls this Poland's EU protected croissant, and the European Union has this thing called protected designation of origin. And what they do is they will like legally tie the name to the food item or to the product that's being produced. And I think the intention is that it's supposed to preserve the reputation. This is good Belgian chocolate, and this is whatever the thing is we're talking about, and so that way people can't like piggyback on the reputation. But I think it's also to help kind of, because now the European Union is vastly different countries, and there are all these different countries that are kind of coming together, and I wonder if there was any kind of concern that maybe they would be losing in some kind of cultural identity, or maybe all being kind of melted together into one big thing. I wonder, do you and this is a question that I'll ask just openly to the panel, if anybody wants to answer, you can jump in. But do you think that like the United States should do something like that? Should like designate, this is the New Orleans beignet, and this is the New York slice of pizza, and this is the Boston baked bean, and you can't call it, nobody else can call it that. I mean, do you think, do we face kind of the same issue? Do we need to protect these regional reputations, and or do we need to, are we at the risk of, they say the world is shrinking every day. Are we at the risk of losing these little regional identities? Anybody want to chime in on that?
The only reason I'm going to chime in about this is that we're a nation of immigrants. So if we start saying that, like, this is a New York piece of pizza, this is, Boston baked beans, this is, Maryland crab cakes, whatever. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Well, we'll go by state, but it doesn't like where the, this particular pastry ties to the people of Poland. It is to them a representation of them as a country, as a people. Now, if we did like a New York pizza, okay, are we doing that for the Italians? Are we doing an Americanized version of, because like Italian pizza is different than Americanized pizza. So how we doing that distinction, and how does it unite that particular food as, a symbol of the people? Mm-hmm. This comes from my particular, there's certain French dishes that I make as, I'm Canadian French. There are certain dishes that are recognizable as Quebecian that I make, during the holidays, that tie me to my French heritage. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm, a natural born citizen in the United States, but that distinction of my heritage is right. What the food represents. And I think that if we start muddying it up by doing it by state, especially where we are a melting pot, we are a nation of immigrants, it gets weird, and it doesn't have that long tradition that has a specific emotional and significance to those particular people. And that's my concern.
Let's hop over to Jason. You wanted to interject there, Jason?
Well, yeah, I think what Helen was hitting on is the fact that a lot of these places that we're talking about are much more monocultural. So right. It's easier to maintain something that's been there for so long. I mean, where I live in Houston is, I think, currently the most ethnically diverse city and culturally diverse city in the world at this point. So I can agree with what Helen's saying. That said, there is a grave need for cultural symbols that are nationwide. And I think a lot of what really fucks us is that these symbols that people adhere to are promoted via indiscriminate not indiscriminate, actually very focused capitalism. Mm-hmm. And then are supported by institutions like churches and the media and right. other things. And they all work together and have their own little party. And those are our symbols that we attribute, so much, I guess, just meaning to. And so we already do have our nationwide symbols. I just think that they're terrible and destructive because they're rooted in gain and commodity fetishism and,
right.
just unhealthy competition.
This conversation started out about croissants and it's going in a totally interesting direction. And so I just want to follow that. Aaron, what do you think about Jason was just saying? Does this kind of, not necessarily legislating, but officially designating this type of cultural identity, which is kind of what they're doing here with this croissant, they're saying this is Polish, this is part of Poland's history. Do you think that opens up those groups for manipulation? Do you think if because we know that people when their identity is threatened, they can get very defensive and can be easily coerced into call to arms and that kind of thing. Do you think that's kind of rearing its head here? Are we looking too deeply into the croissant here?
I think we might be looking a little bit too deeply into the croissant, but I don't. I mean, what is uniquely American? We're such a melting pot, right? Of so many different countries and cultures and backgrounds. You go to Europe and other parts of the world. When people came over to America, they wiped out all the native people, and so there's no native culture really left in the United States. I as part of this article, I was trying to think what are truly purely American foods, and I think the only one I came up with was the hamburger. I think the hamburger was invented in the United States.
Okay. And
bourbon. I think while we were talking, I think bourbon is required to be manufactured in the United States. Other than that, that's the only two foods that I can think of. But I think I remember there was the documentary series Jazz by Ken Burns. I think one of the quotes in that was there's only three things that the United States will pass on that are truly unique to them: the Constitution, jazz music, and baseball. I think was or national parks. All those I can't remember one of them, but yeah, those seem to be the only things that are uniquely American. But I don't at the bottom of it, I don't have a problem with countries designating something to be culturally significant. I just don't think the United States has much of a culture when it comes to food.
Right. Or at least not a monoculture like some of these European countries have, right?
This just in, I'm about to be corrected.
The hamburger has been traced back to ancient Rome.
All right.
There you go. All right.
We'll strike that off the list.
So it's Italian after all.
I love the internet. I was just like, where is the origin? And I did a Google.
Okay, so I wanted to take a little spin here with this story. Associating saints with particular food items is nothing new for the Catholic Church. They have tons and tons of saints, as Helen was talking about earlier. Courtesy of the National Catholic Register, here are some Catholic saints and their associated tasty treats. Of course, we're all familiar with St. Nicholas of Syracuse, closely related to Santa Claus. He's the patron saint of baking, confectionaries, and chocolatiers. We have St. Hyacinth, the patron saint of pierogies, also a Polish treat. St. Anthony the Abbot, patron saint of butchers, charcuterie, and bacon. That's a delicious one there. Saint Drogo, not to be confused with Drogo from the Game of Thrones, patron saint of coffee and baristas. Okay, that one's a handy one. And on the flip side of that, we have Dom Justo Takayama Ukan. He's the patron saint of tea. Saint Arnulf of Metz is the patron saint of beer, a big favorite. Saint Neot is the patron saint of fish fries. Oh, I love a good fish fry. We have Saint Bridget of Kildare. She's the patron saint of cheese. Saint Abigail, patron saint of honey. Saint Nicholas of Tolentino, patron saint, and we're all inclusive here, the patron saint of vegans and vegetarians. And with an honorable mention here, we have Saint Erasmus of Formia, who is the patron saint of intestinal and stomach distress. And so we kind of round that out with that one there. Now, I did ask the panel to each come up with a saint and their associate and have a patron saint of some kind of delicious treat. So let's start with Aaron. Did you come up with who's your patron saint of
I have two, but it's not not associated with food. I was raised Mormon, and so I don't know any of these patron saints. I don't know where they come from. I don't know who the patron saint committee is that decides this stuff.
So the patron saint of confusion is what Aaron's talking about.
I have two patron saints. I'm going to say Joseph Smith, would be the patron saint of word escapes me. Rogues, I guess, liars and cheats.
All right,
and
con men, right?
Con men,
Okay.
yes. The patron saint of con men. And then Brigham Young would be the patron saint of bigotry and racism.
All right. Definitely
gonna
not in
eat
the
in their
tasty
honor?
treat event there, but still worthy, worthwhile
Do I get to eat
contribution.
funeral
there.
potatoes? That's the real question. Do I get funeral potatoes?
Yes. And funeral potatoes would be the designated food for all Mormon celebrations. Yes.
Of course. Helen, what's your patron saint of what?
I chose Saint Thomas Aquinas. Who is not only this patron saint of bad arguments, that God is the arbiter of reason. So cool man. Anyway,
right.
But he is also the patron saint of scholars and students and pencil makers. So
right.
I chose for his delicious treat ramen noodles, because it is the standard delicious food of all students.
Naturally.
Yes. So that is my saint of the day, who was also very problematic, because all saints are.
All right, Jason, what do you got for us here?
All right, well, I got Saint Apollonia, and she was one of a group of virgin martyrs who suffered in Alexandria during a local uprising against the Christians prior to the persecution of Decius. According to church tradition, her torture included having all of her teeth violently pulled out or shattered. For this reason, she is popularly regarded as the patroness of dentistry and those suffering from toothache or other dental problems. So I was thinking I could also make her the patron saint of yogurt.
There we go.
Or ice cream, or all
Yogurt
things creamy.
Exactly. So, Good call there. My patron saint, and I had two, but one of them was almost identical to what Helen said. I chose Saint Thomas Aquinas. And he, as we know, as you mentioned, he's the author of many pretty bad arguments for the existence of a God. So I thought he would be the patron saint of old chestnuts, right? So Saint Thomas Aquinas, patron saint of old chestnuts. And another, piggybacking on Helen again here, Helen, you mentioned Mother Teresa earlier, and so I chose her. Mother Teresa, as you mentioned before. She preached that suffering is what brings you close to God. And so I chose Mother Teresa to be the patron saint of the Hertz donut. So that's so there we go. So that's our collection, our cadre of saints, as you will. And
I would like to see what people put in the comments if they could pick a patron saint.
That's an excellent suggestion there. All of you out there,
associate foods with them. I would love
to
see
if you think you can top our collection of saints here, let's see some comments down there below. And if you want to watch more nonprofits, then just click these links.